Welcome back from lunch, everyone. Call the meeting back to order. We have agenda items D6, 8, and 9 to cover this afternoon. And so starting with D6, 2026 proposed operating budget amendments. Ms. Gibbons, the microphone is yours.
And I'm in control. Okay, thank you. So yeah, next up we will be actually getting into our recommended amendments to the 2026 budget on the operating side. Technology always defeats me. Okay, there we go. As some of you will recall, Council approved a 2-year operating budget in February for the years 2025 and 2026. That 2026 approved budget included $104.9 million in expenditures and represented a 7.1% tax increase net of growth and excluding the livability tax program. That tax increase includes the $3.9 million that we anticipated needing in additional funding that was required to maintain our existing programs and services. This current amendment cycle for 2026 formally started in August of this year. Amendments aren't meant to really open the budget in its entirety. Departments are still to follow their approved business plans, but it does provide an opportunity to address any extraordinary or emergent circumstances. To build on this current process a little more, amendment cycles like this one are really to provide that review opportunity. So departments have the chance to review their approved budgets for any information or trends that would impact what they might need for 2026 to maintain those existing programs and services. Amendments may be considered for things like revenue changes, reduction in costs, or cost increases. No new initiatives were to be put forward as adjustments unless they aligned with updated council priorities. The process is the departments prepared summaries of the recommended amendments, which came to us in finance for a preliminary review, and then are ultimately brought forward for a review by the corporate strategic team, and the ones they put forward are the ones we're bringing to you today. The operating budget amendment discussions for this afternoon will include a review of the proposed operating budget amendments that do impact tax rates. We'll go through a quick reminder of the previously approved use of the tax stabilization reserve to offset some of the 2026 tax increase. Then we'll go through a review of proposed operating amendments that have no tax impact, and then a review of operating amendment reclassifications, and those don't have either a tax or a reserve implication. So starting with the operating budget amendments that will have a tax impact. So on the revenue side, starting with planning, so based on current year trends for 2025, it is expected that the development permit fees will be lower. So earlier, when Mr. Foppel spoke to us being over budget, primarily that's in building permits related to a few key developments, but overall in other types of permit revenue were actually down. And so for 2026, we had increased it from 2025. We're recommending adjusting that. Again, this is all based on the trending we're seeing for this year. So a reduction of $50,000 there. On the RCMP side, this was covered really quickly in the impacts of other levels of government presentation, but we are receiving a grant for the body-worn cameras, expected to be $19,297, so we're adding that to the plan for next year. So those are the only two tax impacts. On the expense side, we had an estimate of 2% in for the cost of living adjustment, or what we refer to as COLA, when that 2026 budget was approved. We now have the Calgary CPI data for the 12-month rolling average, and what we're actually seeing is 2.5%. So we're increasing it, again, in our historic practice in providing that COLA increase to our staff based on that 12-month rolling average, but we'll need more money to do that. On the benefit side, to compare to what was originally budgeted, it is expected that there will be an increase in our health benefits premium rates and our short-term disability costs. These increases are partially offset by a reduction in the expected WCB premium for next year. On the facility side, utility costs are expected to be lower because of removal of the federal carbon tax and lower projected commodity costs for natural gas. So that is anticipated to result in $303,000 worth of savings. We will be discussing these savings further at the next Finance Committee in relation to some options around capital projects. Within planning, it was a result of hiring an internal safety codes officer rather than the external contract we'd had previously. The existing contract for inspection services will only be on an as-needed basis, and so overall with that change, we're expecting savings of $23,500. We've talked about the RCMP a few times today, but we did receive an updated multi-year financial plan, and there is a projected decrease in expenses of $100,000 for 2026, again based on their estimates of their FTE utilization, basically how many members we have active. Next up, now that the Cougar Creek flood retention structure has been operationalized, our original budget didn't actually consider the annual operating costs with operating that structure now. So that's roughly $61,400 annually, which encompasses professional fees and the utility costs for that building. So that's a new addition.
Ms. Gibbons?
Yeah,
May I?
of course.
Thank you, Your Worship. The RCMP reduction in staffing. Can you go into that one a little bit further? I find that interesting since our population hasn't decreased, but this must be something else.
So it doesn't relate to the approved members, it relates to what they're actually expecting. So Mr. Mackay can maybe jump in here, but we're seeing that savings this year just in terms of recruitment and actually having members here. So it's not a reflection in terms of the approved members, those have stayed stable. I can't remember when the next increases there would be. You're right, our population does continue to grow. But in terms of what they're actually seeing utilized and the number of members that are here at our detachment, that's what dictates our costs. We're seeing savings in the current year, and they're actually reflecting that kind of reality in their projections now for 2026. Mr. Mackay, let me know if I've mischaracterized that.
There's often members on leave,
Yes.
and that will impact the
Right. Yeah.
actual members that
Yes,
you're charged for.
There's slippage in the salaries essentially because of being on leaves for
But there's
various
no reduction
reasons.
in overall members that would be our contingent.
Are we receiving the same level of service that we have in the past?
I mean, I'd say that's a complicated question. I mean, it's approximately, I believe, 19 FTEs is the allocation, and the actual usage year over year tends to be in the 14, 15
Right.
range,
Yeah.
give or take. So it does fluctuate, and they've essentially updated their slippage target.
Yeah.
Ms. Gibbons, could you elaborate more on what the operating budget entails for the Cougar Creek flood retention structure? Is that?
Yeah, it's, excuse me, a lot of it is just related to the monitoring equipment
Okay.
that is part of that structure, right? And I would also add, it was not included in the budget. It was really an omission. The recognition was there that there would be an operating cost going forward. It was just missed. It was recognized but not included in 2025, so we're just correcting that.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Smitters. And I guess we can assume that's probably an ongoing operation cost for the life of the structure.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
We do have a contribution to reserves, though, for maintenance of this, like capital maintenance of the structure, don't we, or?
We do. That is more targeted to maintenance after a flood event. This is just the year over year.
Clearing out
Yeah.
debris, making sure that it's.
Yeah, replacement of,
Yeah.
yeah.
If there are no further questions on the recommended amendments that do have a tax impact, moving on, these are recommended budget amendments that do not have a tax impact. Oh, sorry. First, I'll do a summary. So the net decrease in budgeted revenues, there was an increase and a decrease. There is an increase of $30,703. The net decrease in net decrease in budgeted revenues, and then a net decrease in budgeted expenses, $400,000. So overall, we're in the fortunate position of having a reduction in our overall requirements to support our net operating budget, which allows us to take our original budgeted tax increase, again excluding growth, from 7.1% down to 6.1%. So overall savings in what we're bringing forward from those amendments. As a reminder, the approved 2026 operating budget included a transfer from the tax stabilization reserve. The amount of that transfer was for $343,000, and the impact on the tax rate was a little less than 1%. Some additional notes, the projected balance in that tax stabilization reserve at the end of 2026 is projected to be just over 3.5 million. As per our policy, the minimum balance in the tax stabilization reserve is approximately 2 million, and the target balance is approximately 5. So our projected balance for the end of 2026 is between that minimum and target range. And as a reminder, the purpose of that reserve, as stated, is to mitigate tax rate increases in cases of an emergent and/or non-recurring nature. So sorry, I jumped a little bit ahead of myself. Next was the recommended operating budget impacts that do not have a tax impact. So franchise fee reductions are expected for both Fortis and ATCO to the tune of about 190,000. Fortis represents 50 of that and ATCO 140,000. The franchise fee reduction is really based on the calculated estimates that they both provide us. So ATCO and Fortis provide us their annual estimates in the form of a calculator. And so when we looked at what that represents for next year, it's really their estimates that are resulting in this reduction. And the franchise fee rate for Fortis for 2026, as a reminder, will be moving from 16% to 18%. And so this projected decrease considered would otherwise be higher if we weren't also in a year where our franchise fee rates are already projected to increase. So this does consider that. But why this has no tax impact is, as you may recall, we have our franchise fee allocation model, and so these franchise fees flow directly to our sustainability reserve and our asset rehab reserve. So there's a projected reduction to the sustainability reserve of 19,000 and the asset rehab reserve of 171,000. Next, we have the projected increase in business license revenue because of the change in business registry bylaw amendments that were recently passed. So with that change in the revenues, we have the increased revenues, but it is offset. So there is an increase in salary, wages, benefits, expenses of just under 49,000 related to the positions required to support that. There's an increase in training of $1,000, and then the remainder of that increase, just under $110,000, increases the transfer to the Economic Development Reserve because our business license revenue supports that reserve. We also have the opportunity as part of the budget amendment process to do certain administrative transfers to move expenses from one department to another based on where they're most effectively delivering the services. So we did have 2 of those this year, and again, it just relates to service delivery, but it will change where certain expenses show up within the departmental pages. So we're moving the GIS, Geotechnical Information System, I always use the acronym, thank you, knew I got it wrong. So those are moving from previously they'd been housed within engineering, but we're moving to IT to properly align with where those will be best be delivered moving forward. And additionally, I spoke to this as part of the orientation package for some of the members here, but we are also moving the assessment review board expenses from our finance department, which has historically supported it, to the municipal clerk's office to better align with those boards and committees and where that expertise is best held. And that is really it for the summary of the amendments. Just wanted to open it up in case there were any questions or clarifications on any of that content.
Any questions? Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Mayor Krauser, and thank you, Ms. Gibbons, for that presentation. Just to get some numbers straight in my head here, if we were to approve this provincial liaison position that we were talking about earlier, it would still result in a decrease in the projections of, I guess, 0.4%, so it would be a 6.7% over 2-year increase rather than the 6.1?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Any other questions? I see none.
Okay, and I guess just speaking to the change in order, and while we're on the topic, there was one thing I just wanted to be transparent about. So really, the amendments are about maintaining those programs and services, and we have an approved budget. So there were new positions that were already approved for 2026. There were 4 full-time equivalent new positions that were approved in 2026. So the budget would include the HR coordinator position. It's envisioned as 1 full-time role, but it would be half property assessment and taxation, so paid for through taxes, half utilities assistant, shown there below, funded through transfers through the utility rates that we charge. the geographic information system technician, that would also be funded through taxes, and then the zero waste coordinator that would be paid for through utility fees as well. So those are the 4 new positions that were already approved. So if we'd followed the previous order of today's presentation, this is when we would have moved into Dr. Cuddle's presentation on that additional option. And so that concludes everything we were going to go through on the operating amendment side.
Okay, I don't see any questions, so we can move on to item D8, which is the projected debt servicing, reserves, and unfunded capital projects. Yeah. Do we have handouts for this one? Or are they? No. Thank you, sir.
So the purpose of this presentation is to give an overview of projections, where our total debt and, excuse me, our total reserves are headed, as well as a list of our, a list of our unfunded, and a description of our unfunded capital projects at this time. So, I guess this is just kind of like to rehash that. So this serves as an introduction to the November 18th Finance Committee meeting, because we're going to be talking about our capital budget amendments at that meeting. So I think everybody CST wanted to give Council, Finance Committee, an overview of where we're sitting with our debt, with our reserves, and our unfunded capital projects. And I think this will help us understand some of the future financial challenges that we're going to be facing. Now, before I get into the debt projection, excuse me, sorry I'm choked up here a bit. Yeah, no doubt. Are you okay? I'm good. I'm good, thank you. So I have a few definitions I wanted to go through. So first, I wanted to define debt limit, okay? And so our debt limit, or any municipality's debt limit, is based on Alberta's debt limit regulation. So it's defined by the province. So the amount we can borrow is 1.5 times our annual operating revenues. So of course, this gets recalculated on an annual basis, can vary based on our operating revenues. Also want to define total debt. So total debt of the town of Canmore could include not only our debt, but any debt of any organization that we're guaranteeing their debt for. So a consideration when we look at our total debt. Now, to add on to that, internally, or council's passed a policy that the town of Canmore debt management policy that stipulates that our total outstanding debt cannot exceed 70% of the provincial debt limit. Okay, so it restricts it down. So we're being conservative. We're saying that our total debt has to be less than that provincial threshold. So just to continue on there, debt servicing limit. So it's also prescribed by the provincial government, by the debt limit regulation. And our debt servicing limit is, again, calculated based on our operating revenue. So it's 0.25 times our operating revenues. Excuse me. And again, our total debt servicing, so debt servicing being cost of principal and interest payments on our loans. It also includes any potential debt servicing on debt that is guaranteed by the municipality. And again, we have a policy that stipulates that our debt servicing costs cannot exceed 70% of our debt servicing limit, okay? So we just wanted to get those definitions out there before we look at where our debt is headed. Excuse me, so this slide illustrates, it's a projection of where we think our debt could be headed in the next 5 years. So a few things to note is the blue bar is our existing debt. So that's debt that we currently have. The red bar is what we're projecting our debt to be. And you'll see in 2029, it goes up there a bit. Now the black line is our internal debt limit, okay? So if you look at the 2029 bar, you can see that our total projected debt is gonna be higher than what our internal debt limit is, okay? And so what happens in 2029 is, and we'll talk more about this on November 18th, is with the construction of the wastewater treatment plant upgrade, we're gonna be taking on a bunch of new debt. And so in that year, you can see our debt's going up quite a bit, okay? And of course, there's some other planned borrowings in 2030, and so you can see our debt going up a little more as well. The good news is we're still below the provincial debt limit calculation, so we're still, go ahead.
Thank you. With regards to the wastewater treatment plant upgrade, I know it's a significantly priced project. Does the amount of debt that we're estimating take into account potential grants that we may receive?
Yes.
Yes, so this
Yes.
is net of
That's correct.
provincial
Yep.
or any grants. So if we happen to exceed our projections on grants, this number could go down, or
Right.
if we get
And now-
price creep, it could go up.
Yeah, precisely. I think, like that project would be funded with the Alberta Wastewater Partnership Program, and I think it's roughly about a third that would be funded from that provincial program, providing everything still stays the same, you know, as we look forward into those years. But yes, yeah.
Thank you.
And yeah, if costs creep up, then yeah, the potential for that debt to be higher, of course.
And so to exceed our internal debt limit, we would have to have a motion of council authorizing an exception to it, or
Yeah.
pause to it due to this project, if
If this is the case, I mean, keep in mind that these are projections, right? And I mean, Rick has some really detailed spreadsheets to build these projections. They're pretty conservative, but I mean, we want to be that way.
yeah,
when we're-
they change year to year based
Totally,
on
yeah,
more and accurate information as we get it.
right,
Right.
yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, don't be sorry. Is it Mr. Faupel or?
Fopple, yeah.
Faupel.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Faupel, or maybe this is also for Ms. Robbins as well, or Ms. Gibbons. I've always appreciated the 70% line because it's kind of like a prudent, conservative piece. Does this practice get reflected in other municipalities as well, or are we a bit of like a best practice organization with this?
From my experience as an auditor, I have never seen anybody else do this. I've audited a number of different municipalities across the province, and this is the first time I've seen where the municipality, I know some other bigger municipalities do this, but this is the first time I've personally seen it, so I think it is a good practice.
For sure, okay.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've seen it the other way where municipalities have gone over the provincial debt limit, and that creates a whole other mess. And
That was my next question, like, in your experience as an auditor, how often are like municipalities going over the limit?
I've only seen it a few times in, say, 20-some years.
Yeah.
And it was a smaller municipality. They had financial difficulties. A project went over, and they had no choice. But they had to get ministerial approval to go over the debt limit. And I'm just trying to think here. I think they had to have a plan, like.
Yeah, I was just curious, like, what's the ramifications?
Yeah,
as well?
there's like long-term planning, I think, that they had to provide the department in order to, you know, satisfy that. So it wasn't simple, yeah. But I mean, by any stretch, I don't think we're gonna go there. I
For sure.
definitely wouldn't recommend that we do that for sure.
Okay.
And if I could just build on that, I mean, conversations that happened prior to Mr. Foppel coming on board is, we do have quite a healthy haircut there between that limit and our internal threshold. And there were internal conversations with respect to, are there ever reasons where, not because of project overruns, not because of any misplanning, maybe I'll say on our part, but are there strategic reasons where to advance community priorities, say something around housing, would we ever consider exceeding that threshold? And we've looked at what that ministerial process looks like. Again, just understanding all the options that exist to us. And so there are very specific requirements in place. So it needs to be very project specific, that you need, you know, if you're seeking the exemption in advance, it would need to be for a specific project. And like you said, there would need to be a specific plan in place as to what would the revenue sources be that would then offset the cost, to basically show that you have a plan to be able to take on that debt limit since it exceeds what would be standard. So that is something that we've actually looked at in that context, not in the context of you know, necessarily our debt getting ahead of ourselves. Historically, we've had quite low levels of debt. When Avail comes and does their financial indicators report and we look at debt compared to other municipalities, we've always been really healthy with all those indicators. And we have quite a bit of, it's better on the servicing side. The bigger constraining factor is the actual limit on the overall dollar value of the debt. But because interest rates have historically been low these last few years, and as we saw this morning, likely maybe to continue to be so, we have a less constraint on the debt servicing cost side, which I believe you'll get to next.
Okay,
Yeah,
great,
exactly.
thank you so much. And thanks for the context about the 70% within like the broader scope of the province. That's really helpful.
Yep, for sure.
Hi, thank you. I'm curious how far you tend to model this out. I mean, with our current path, like 2040, are we looking at hitting close to that red line, or do you do those kind of projections?
We haven't done those projections in detail, and I think it would be difficult to do right now. I think, yeah, no.
Okay.
I think, right? Yeah. in a
Thank
way.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the short answer is no. I think that's where we're really intentionally looking at updating our long-term financial
Yeah.
strategy. That document was passed, I believe, back in 2017. And so what does the new, what would a new strategy look like for where we're at today with the way our community's growing? And really the key part of that is then having really robust asset management planning to underpin that, to identify what are our needs as a community. And so to me, that's where we don't have it yet, but that is definitely on the roadmap of where we know we need to get to. This is what the MGA requirements are. They're around a 3-year operating, 5-year plan. With the 2-year cycle, we generally have had 4 and 6. And meets all the requirements, but also there's acknowledgement that as a municipality, we have assets with useful lives that are approaching 100 years, if not more. So how do we best plan for the future? And so all that work is currently something we're working towards with ourselves, with the municipal infrastructure team, to start to have some more longer term plans, knowing that is what we need to do to be able to have those more fulsome longer term decisions and make sure we stay on the right path. Ms. Smithers, sorry, I could see there were thoughts percolating there. If you want to
Yeah,
correct
just-
anything I characterized.
I did want to add, we do have a number of condition assessment reports that we use to guide our asset management planning currently, and that would relate to bridges, roadways. We just recently, I think last year, completed a condition assessment of all of our recreation facilities, all 2 of them. No, actually this building as well, I think, was rolled into that. So I just want to be clear that organizationally, asset management definitely needs a more kind of coordinated approach that can tie into our long-term financial planning. That said, departmentally, there is a lot of asset management planning that we rely on when it comes to capital projects and our life cycling. So I just want to be clear on that.
Councillor Graham?
Thank you. If this question needs to go in camera, let me know, but I'm wondering what implications offsite levies may or may not have on this model. And if that's a in-camera question, let me know.
No, it isn't. It's a good question. This chart reflects that the town will generally front-end the capital projects. So offsite levies, some of it is collected before a project is initiated, but typically the offsite levies are collected after the project is already built. So they're related, but the debt servicing really just, or the debt that the municipality takes reflects the fact that generally the municipality has to front end the work and then we get kind of repaid, if you will, after the fact.
Are there risks associated with legal decisions in the, I guess, no, never mind. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so just carrying on that theme, this slide is the debt servicing limit compared to what our actual projected debt servicing costs will be. So again, the blue or the purple box is our existing debt servicing limit, and the red, or debt servicing costs, I should say, sorry, and the red is our projected debt servicing costs as we go forward. And the black line is our internal debt servicing limit, and the red line is the provincial. And you'll see in 2030 that our debt servicing costs go up, and of course that's because of the wastewater treatment plant, and then the fall coming in 2029, and of course the following year having those debt service costs coming in. With the interest rates that we're paying and projecting to be paying, you'll see that we're below the debt servicing, our internal debt servicing. When I work the math, we're about, what is it? I think our weighted average of our total interest on our debt is about 3.76 or something like that. So, you know, it's you know, as a municipality, we get, you know, better rates compared to you with your mortgage or what have you, right? So, if we're good with that, I was going to move forward unless there's any questions. Before I get to the reserve balances, just a quick real rundown definition of reserves. Reserve balances are generally established because of budgeted transfers that we make to reserve. So that could be stuff like paid parking, that kind of thing. Annual operating surpluses from paid parking or something like that. One-time extraordinary revenues would probably go to reserves as well. Now, the reserve balances are there to support current and future asset management maintenance, support asset rehabilitation and replacement projects, support community-related growth, support newly identified projects, and of course provide for contingency needs, somewhat like the tax stabilization reserve. So here, and again, this is a conservative projection of where we think our reserves could be going. So you can see by 2030, it looks like our total reserves could be just under $80 million. You know, that's what we're projecting. Of that, about half would be capital reserves. So that it's blue on my screen, but up there it's kind of a different blue, but it's the lower part of the bar, that would be our capital reserves, okay? So about $40 million we're projecting would be in capital reserves by 2030 if everything kind of goes, you know, according to plan. But sorry, my computer is giving me a hassle here. Yeah, sorry, it's kind of messing up on my speaking notes here, so I'm kind of winging it, but we'll go to the next slide. General capital reserve. So included in that 40 million is a couple of different reserves. First of all, our general capital reserve. And so this is the projection of that reserve alone, okay? So over the next 5 years, we're saying it could be up to $8 million in that reserve as we go forward. Important to note that the purpose of this reserve is to fund new capital projects or for capital expenditures necessary in the case of an emergency. Minimum level, so there has to be a balance in the reserve per our policy to fund new capital projects identified in the long-term financial strategy and capital planning summary, and unanticipated, and also enough in the reserve to fund unanticipated capital expenditures within the next 5 years. So in that 40 million, the other capital reserve is the asset replacement rehabilitation reserve. And so the projected balance of that by 2030 is approximately $18 million. And of course, purpose is to fund asset rehabilitation and replacement capital projects. And again, per our policy, there's a minimum level to include in this reserve. And of course, adequate to fund these capital projects, again, as identified in the financial strategy and capital planning summary, as well as unanticipated capital expenditures within the next 5 years, which is difficult to predict, of course. So while we're getting all this information, sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, it's just the way we roll.
Yep.
And so are there any of our reserve funds that are below the minimum required in the policy?
I don't believe so. I think we're, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a nuanced question.
I know it.
I think how you asked it is a really interesting segue into what we're going to cover next. So you'll see with both general capital and asset replacement rehab, which are the two we speak to most typically on the capital side, there isn't a specified dollar value minimum or target balance. I mean, there's the language there at the bottom about the minimum level, and it's really adequate to fund what we've identified. And as we're about to show you, there's $100 million in unfunded identified projects on the list that we're currently tracking. So I would say there is some nuance there. We don't have specific dollar value targets for each of the reserves. Where we do have those thresholds, I think we're generally within them based on what was approved last time around, and we'd continue to be so. I think the ongoing questions are really what's the right level of reserves for our capital needs, and it's a problem that's shared across I think all municipalities for sure here in Alberta, is that infrastructure kind of deficit deferred maintenance that accumulates over time. We're definitely kind of seeing that here. So when we look at those charts before, and part of why we're including this presentation today, and we'll cover it again quickly on the day we talk about capital, is what we do on the operating side and with our taxes and utility rates directly affects the capital budget and what we can afford, and kind of vice versa. And so going forward, these are some of the big challenges we have. 80 million in reserves sounds like a huge amount of money, especially 40 million specifically on the capital side. But once you start looking at those needs or individual facilities that have a price tag of $40 million, or the price of some of the treatment plants, then it's how all those pieces fit together.
Yeah. What was the total in our unfunded projects?
We're just coming to that. So
I'll quit asking questions that are coming up.
No, but your timing was impeccable.
Plus it's in the materials.
Yeah, and I think I've seen that a lot in my career. The question of how much should a municipality have in reserves, and how much should we tax the current ratepayers to set money aside for the future, and having a long-term financial strategy, and maybe when we're talking about our asset management system in the future, those kind of things would help guide us better than where we are now, I think. So unfunded capital projects, we're going there. So these are capital projects that we've identified, or the town's identified, and will be obligated to complete in future years because of either regulatory requirements, legislative mandates, established agreement that the town has with other entities, or the project is needed by the community or would provide meaningful benefits. And so of all these unfunded capital projects, at this point, no funding has been identified or committed to complete these projects. Okay, so in the reserve projections in the previous slides, they're not considered in those, okay? So, and they're not considered in our debt projections, so, you know, they're not there. So, excuse me, here on this slide, you can see that the total is $106 million, okay? And you can see by year and by department where these projects would fall. And I think in the briefing, you have a detailed list of all these projects. Now, what do I want to say here? Excuse me. Sorry, I don't know what's wrong with my computer here, technology. But I got a printout here. Yeah, it's not working.
Oh, no, I shouldn't have touched it. This is when I try to help and I make things worse. Ben, what did I do?
I should just be able to play it
This is reminding us that financially, with infrastructure, it's an uphill climb. That picture was reminding us that with municipal infrastructure, it's an uphill climb.
12?
And this is why I'm the manager of finance and not IT.
We just want to make this bigger?
Yeah, I couldn't get it to work.
Oh, good.
Can I just
good.
point out, maybe
Yeah,
while they're
we'll
trying to
wait for
make this work, that Mr. Foppel had gone through some of the rationale around unfunded projects. One of the bullets that wasn't on there, but it is a consideration in the 106 million unfunded, is projects where we have, that are life cycle projects, and we've had to make a decision of, we can live with this failing and just not having it around anymore. So I just want to be clear there, because it is definitely, it pushes us to trade-offs, right? The one that's top of mind for me is the life cycle replacement of the playground up in Homesteads, right, up in Cary. So the life cycle decisions are captured in these unfunded projects as well. I just wanted to flag that.
Yeah, so, total is $106.5 million. As we saw in our debt limit slide, that we'll be over our internal debt limit in 2029. So just a consideration when we look at this commitment here, that you know, we're, in theory, we can't borrow anymore in 2029 if we're going to stay with our internal policy. And also, we saw that there was about $40 million in our capital reserves, at least we're projecting that at the end of 2030. But of course, the demands here is $106 million. So we just really wanted to bring that out to say, hey, this is these unidentified or unfunded capital projects. This is where our debt's sitting, and this is where our reserve balances are sitting. And of course, it wouldn't be prudent to drain the reserve balances to fund some of these projects, of course, right? We definitely have to try to maintain those, and I would think probably grow those to meet future potential needs. Yeah, so that was everything on that slide, I think. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions, or anybody want to add anything to that? I think it was just, we wanted to have this discussion as an introduction to our capital amendment meeting on the 18th, just so we understand where we are with this group of capital projects or future capital projects.
And so I'd encourage members of council, if they want to know specifically what's in those roll-ups of those lines, on pages 57 and 58 of the agenda package, it gives the specific projects. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Mayor Krauser, and thank you for the presentation. Sorry if this is like a wild newbie question here, but has there ever been any discussion about like private sector naming rights to assist with the unfunded capital projects like the Crypto.com Canmore Recreation Center or something like that?
Oh, yeah. You you may recall, we did that with Elevation Place. We actually brought in a consultant firm who, like, they have a method and a way to name almost every asset in a facility and what its value is. And so we worked with one company to get that inventory, and we thought we would start with Elevation Place because it was new, and then worked with another consultancy to try to bring in that revenue, and it really, in the end, was not successful at all. There's very little uptake in Canmore of those kinds of naming rights. I think where you see it the most has been at the rink. We've had some success at the rink. We got a new clock, and some of the dressing rooms have been named. But generally, that has not been successful for Canmore in any way. It's another example of where we don't have that expertise on staff. We do have a policy that helps us if something comes in to have some guidance from council in terms of what we would and wouldn't accept. But what we found, and I mean, I appreciate this is the past, it may be a new day and we want to look at it again, but in the past, it really was not successful, and we actually ended up spending more money than we brought in. And then most places that do that, you know, we don't have, if you think about naming rights of big arenas that are in cities where there's professional sports teams, yeah, the reach is huge. And that was always the feedback we got. Like, Canmore's lovely, and we know you're a busy tourist town, but your reach is small. So we don't have as big a reach as they thought. Local businesses, as many of you know who are them, are tapped. I mean, at one point, the previous owner of the Chocolatier told me they were tapped more than once a day for donations. So they're right, and they tend to try to support local groups that are important to their family or in community. So it's really challenging especially for smaller local businesses. And then what we did find is for the ones that we did get, some of them also want activation. So then, depending on, the bigger the gift gets, the more they want from you in terms of, it's not just that they write a check and you put their name up. There's actually, and then we were struggling to resource that in an effective way. So it doesn't mean we can't visit it again, but so to date, our approach wasn't successful.
All right. Thanks for that context.
I wonder if we've got a breakdown between the priorities of an A, B, C, or D within the context of this 106.
Those will be in your capital sheets,
Yeah.
which are in your binder.
But we'd have,
Yeah,
yeah, that's not
And
broken
we're
down.
not in a
Sorry.
capital meeting, right? The capital meeting is on the 18th. Yeah, go ahead.
But anything that's unfunded is automatically a D. So A, B, and C
Right,
is really
right,
only
right.
priorities we use in the context of funded projects.
Right. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Sorry.
What's the difference between general capital and asset replacement? And how do we get to a point in the future where we can take an amount of money and put it into asset replacement every year and know that that amount of money takes us into the future to replace what we have now?
So Dr. Cottle, I heard your chuckle, so feel free to jump in here. I mean, these are, it's a really good question, and it's something that came up even in our internal conversation. So I will say historically, those lines used to be clearer from my perception. So general capital was to fund new things. Asset rehab replacement was to do asset management work, to repair, rehab, replace existing assets. So that delineation was clearer. And we'll get into some of the nuance of some of the funding decisions we've made more when we get to the capital day. But I think increasingly, and I don't, I feel like I keep having the same conversation, but even in the 6 years I've been here, things always just get more complicated. And as a community, generally, we're not replacing like for like very often anymore. We're replacing things with a new, better version of what was there previously. And so that distinction between, well, what's net new versus what's replacing what we have becomes very complex. And so I would say, the reserves policy speaks to a little bit of that. I think what we're choosing is increasingly gray in the conversations I'm having with managers. Well, does general capital feel more right? Does asset rehab feel more right? Sometimes there could be justifications made either way, but generally we follow the intent of the reserves policy. Things that are newer would generally tend to come from the general capital Things that are replacing what we have currently and really driven by asset management would tend to come from the asset management reserves policy. But especially some of our like IT systems replacements have led to more nuanced discussion about some of that.
Yeah, I add to that. Yeah, and I wasn't laughing at you. It really is a good question. I was laughing because we do have the same conversation internally. And one of the really nice things about having Mr. Foppel?
Yeah, that's close. That's good.
What is it?
Fopple.
Okay, thank you. I will get it eventually. On staff is that we've suggested that after he settles in and gets through the budget, that one of the things that they could look at together in finance for next year is around reserves and best practices around how to help define that. And you may recall that last year we also implemented a corporate services holdback on things. And we kind of arbitrarily picked our best guess at what a good target was. So that's also on, these kind of things are on the list now that we have this resource in finance.
Yeah.
We may not solve it any cleaner than we already have it, but we're gonna work with them to take a good look at it.
Yeah, okay, awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is like when I look at these lists of unfunded capital projects and like some projects, you have to replace them and you just gotta replace them. But other stuff, like sometimes I wonder, like, okay, we're gonna make project X, what's the rate of asset replacement for it? And then I weigh it against another project or another element. Okay, well, we do this, we're on the hook for this amount sooner if we do this. Like, this is quite an interesting thing on replacing stuff. Like, yeah. That was just more a commentary than a question, really.
Any other questions? And we will be doing a deeper dive into the capital stuff next time. I'm going to suggest that we take a break. Let's take a decent break to walk around. Let's come back at 2:10.
Okay.
Get some All right, we are back, and we're turning to our last item for today, and that's D9, Livability Tax Program 3-year budget. So whenever you're ready, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Mayor Krauser. This is the last item of the day, as was mentioned. The report is quite long, and really that was just to give Councillors Murray and Councillors Marin a good opportunity to see a lot of the relevant historic context. So we can kind of go through this as quickly or as slowly as required. And just so folks know as well, that we do plan on ending on a closed session. So I'll just kind of breeze through a little bit of the context and the background. Not quite as detailed as the report, but again, if we do want to have some more discussion, please let us know. Just to provide a little bit of that relevant context. Some of the pieces were covered in the provincial downloading, where the impacts of higher levels of government on ourselves talk. So I won't go into too much detail there. But we also will, of course, talk about the operating budget and the reserve budget that are associated with it. This came up a lot, I believe, on the election campaign. So just so folks are aware, a resort municipality status has been in the works, or attempted to be in the works, for almost 20 years. So the town has worked with Banff and Jasper, and more recently that has expanded to include additional municipalities like Drumheller and Sylvan Lake, really looking for some way to support tourism infrastructure. So in BC, if you're not super familiar with the resort municipality status, it allows municipalities who experience significant tourism to receive a portion of a hotel tax for tourism infrastructure and amenities. And despite persistent efforts over that almost 2-decade period, we have not been successful at really gaining the endorsement and support of the province on obtaining this resort municipality status. And of course, as you saw previously, the lack of ability to support tourism infrastructure and amenities does continue to strain the community in various ways. This slide just speaks to some of the other provincial funding and policy implications that impact livability. We did talk about the change in MSI and the formula for the local government fiscal framework and how our permanent population is kind of disproportionately impacted because the non-permanent population is not included in that calculation. We also spoke about the impacts of the property education tax and the way that methodology is done, and how our above average assessed values contribute to some challenges there as well. In terms of the current housing crisis, I think we all know that we are experiencing a housing crisis. The median assessed value of a single-family detached home is $1.42 million. And the median assessed value of a residential condo is $814,000. Using data provided from Canmore Community Housing, the median rental for a 1-bedroom as of this year is about $2,000 per month, and for a 2-bedroom is about $3,000. Of course, a key factor impacting housing is that approximately 25% of all homes in our community are not occupied by folks who live or work within the community. And to combat this crisis, we do require significantly more non-market housing. It does vary based off source, but what we typically use is kind of the bold vision for what to strive towards is around the 2,000 mark by 2021. And combined efforts of the not-for-profit and the for-profit industries are expected to produce hundreds of units by 2031, but this will continue to fall short of what the community actually needs.
Just a couple questions of clarification. Those numbers for the median assessed value, those are the updated, those are based on the 2025 assessments?
Correct, we won't have the next years of assessment
No, I
data
just
until
appreciate that. I've been
February.
using the 2024, so I appreciate getting
Okay.
these.
There are some fresh ones.
Well, the condo actually might have gone down a wee bit, the median assessed value, but the single-family home definitely went up. And, yeah, when I've been talking about those units we need, I'm looking hopefully and very optimistically at maybe a 10-year horizon. So, you know, I know that the Bow Valley Regional Housing Report was 2031 that we need that amount of housing. So I'm hoping, you know, by 2035, you know, we can take a significant portion of that into our community. So.
Awesome, thanks. In terms of where we're at for non-market housing, so we've talked a little bit earlier today about Canmore Community Housing, and there are two programs within Vital Homes. So there's the ownership program. It will reach an inventory of close to 200 by the end of this fiscal year. And the current wait list is actually over 300 approved applicants. In terms of the rental program, the inventory should reach, is about 108 units at the moment, and the current wait list is over 230 approved applicants. As most folks also know, they were able to break ground with, you know, the support of the town and a majority funding from the town a minority funding of the town of $9.5 million in order to be able to go to market and secure the majority funding for that project. And it is anticipated to produce 144 non-market rental units for the community. Additional expected growth. So based on the existing development approvals, development industry will contribute about 104 ownership units to CCH's portfolio over the next 5 years. And of course, the more recent YWCA development of the Mustache Lands is expected to produce a mix of commercial retail space and 270 residential units.
So I would just note that we are talking about the 2,000. If you take into account the units, the ownership units, and I just went blank on their, Ptarmigan Point, take into account Ptarmigan Point, the units that will be non-market at LGMS, the 104 and the 270, we're just shy of 500 units right there, and that is active, built in the ground or almost in the ground project. So there's hope. 500 now are going, and so we just keep building on that.
Absolutely. So just to go through a little bit in terms of the timeline and some of the significant milestones regarding housing action and some of that hope that Mayor Krauser just spoke to. In June 2023, Council approved the Housing Action Plan, and it was ultimately seeking to encourage long-term occupancy of existing housing, to encourage an increase in rental supply, and also to create a sustainable funding source to support that non-market housing need. In September 2023, Council approved the creation of the Livability Task Force and tasked that group to develop a plan to phase out the tourist home designation, to investigate tax options to incentivize purpose-built rental accommodation, and also to investigate tax options to incentivize full-time, long-term occupancy of residential units. And that's really what birthed the Livability Tax Program under the arm of incentivizing full-time, long-term occupancy of residential units. So I think, as most folks here know, in 2024, Council approved the subclass bylaw, which ultimately created the Livability Tax Program. That subclass bylaw divides the residential property class into two subclasses, creating a mechanism for applying different tax rates based upon usage. The primary residence declaration, a primary residence usage is defined as greater than or equal to 183 days per year including 60 consecutive days. Talking a little bit more about some of the action around the livability tax program. In January 2025, that subclass bylaw was challenged in judicial review, citing it as unlawful. In April 2025, a hearing was held by the Court of King's Bench. In the same month, a decision was issued by the court, and it deemed the application of different tax rates based on usage as lawful, but it did direct the town to not use those different tax rates in terms of application until the 2026 tax year. In May 2025, Council approved budget amendments based off the postponement of that livability tax, and then the external third party filed an appeal for the court's decision. In September 2025, the Premier sent a letter to the Minister of Municipal Affairs directing the ministry to develop and implement a strategy that protects Albertans from specialized taxes for non-primary residences. In October of 2025, the second primary residence declaration window was open to property owners. And it's important to note that this declaration does include the ability to isolate non-primary residents owned by non-Albertans. So if there's no questions, I will pass it off to Ms. Gibbons to walk us through the 3-year operating budget.
I'm much shorter than you. Over the course of the next 3 years, the program is projected to generate $31.3 million. Admin and general services does include some direct work of the program. That's where the $100,000 grant related to the tax incentive for purpose-built rentals actually lies. On the next slide, I do have the details of the proposed livability reserve budget. And that proposal is what essentially we're using all the amounts collected to be spent on those livability programs. The transfers to other reserves includes repayment to various town reserves for the initial support of the program, as well as the reimbursement to the general operating reserve for the funds that were allocated to the Partners for Affordable Housing project. And included in expenses is internal transfers of, you can see in the bottom line there, roughly $300,000 per year to basically reimburse other departments for their assistance in administering various aspects of the program. So there are positions that are directly embedded in that salary, wages, and benefits line, but for all the work that other departments do in other positions in support of the program, that's what those internal transfers are meant to encompass. So
Sorry, if I can just add to that, and I just want to be clear here because sometimes these two numbers get smushed together, and one of the things people express concern about is the cost of implementing the program. That internal transfer to reserve is a holdback policy across the organization. We're not tracking those specific hours, and we do it with other reserves as well. Paid parking is also the same percentage, like across all the reserves except for the development, which is at 10%. Across the organization, it's a 20% holdback. It's not about tracking hours. So this is a change that the previous council approved it with the last budget, and that's where that number comes from. It's just the 20%. It's not about specific tasks, just for clarity.
Great, thanks. That bottom internals transfers line, so there's a policy, well, I should say policy with a small p, but that was a new change with the last budget cycle where we're really because we don't do activity-based costing. So yeah, it's that internals transfer line, and it encompasses the operating expenses of the department as the basis of the calculation minus some specific items like the grant.
Thank you, and I support the transfer. What I'm just having trouble following is what is that 20% of?
So the admin and general, I think the salaries, wages, and benefits would be included there. The admin and general services and contracted services, we don't consider the transfers to the reserves to be part of that base.
So when you add the first 3 lines and the internal transfer line, they add up to amount, 20% of that is the 293.
Yeah, the 293 is the 20% of those top 3.
Perfect.
And there's some nuance. I think the grant maybe isn't included in there and some of that.
Thank
But
you.
and that's consistent across the departments we apply it.
Okay, thank you.
So unless there are any questions on the operating budget, I did want to speak more specifically to that transfer to livability reserve line and what we're ultimately using the money for that we're collecting through the program. There you go. So we have more specificity around that first project now than we did at the last budget cycle, now that some of these projects are at a different point and more public. So the first is the contribution to the YWCA for the Mustache Lands project. The plan is to contribute $10 million over 2 years to the YWCA, as they will need to fundraise approximately $150 million for the development of roughly 270 below market units. Next is the large area redevelopment plan, which represents phases 1 and 2 of a land use policy exercise. Phase 1 will begin with a technical evaluation of the infrastructure capacity. Next is the Stoneworks Creek mitigation. So completion of this project would enable earlier construction of non-market housing and Stoneworks Creek employee housing. For the Palliser pedestrian crossing design, so given the number of units that will increase in Palliser, a future pedestrian crossing will be required over the highway. This project will allow the crossing to be shovel-ready and potentially support the ability to access grant funding for that project. As a reminder, the project itself to construct the crossing is currently unfunded, but this is about getting it shovel-ready, which really helps access those grant funding opportunities. The next line is for grant program assistance. So this project would develop a grant funding program for housing providers that would be available by application to assist with covering offsite levy and planning application fees, and that would support rent stability or possibly reduction. Next is the AltaLink realignment. So completion of this project would allow for future construction of an additional 200 units of non-market housing. And finally is the CCH requisition increase. So this would reduce the property tax increase based on the annual requisition from CCH. Councillor Marie?
Thank you, Ms. Gibbons. I'm just curious, is the successful completion of the YWCA Mustache Lands project contingent on them receiving this money from us over those 2 years? No? Okay. Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, I think the plan after this was just to go into the closed session. So sorry, Councillor Frobet.
The grant program to assist with covering offsite levies and planning application fees. What about, and I don't know if this is the right place to ask this question, but you know how we approved the policy for purpose-built rental and that there's that 25% differential on the property taxes? Could we not use the livability tax to cover off that differential of taxes on any purpose-built rentals that receive an incentivized?
Yeah, so in this admin and general services line within the operating budget itself, the line item it's grouped under, if you have the more detailed breakdown reports from last year, I believe had it showing in the grants line item, but that is the livability tax program is already intended to fund the purpose-built rental incentive program. We haven't have any properties coming through yet. We will soon, and then this will be used to pay for that difference.
And that was like my other question is like what would that look like? But clearly that answer is coming in the future, so I'm not going to ask it.
The grant program, you mean the newly suggested one or the purpose-built rental one?
Well, yeah, because we don't have any purpose-built rentals that's
Right.
completed, so none of them have even been charged taxes
That's
for us to even know what that amount is.
Right, so we're making some educated guesses, but it is included in the budget, and we are expecting one to come online late this year or early next year, and then we'll be able to have a better sense of that.
Oh, yeah, okay, thank you.
We budgeted 100,000, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions before I move that we go into a closed session? No? Okay, so while the Motion is coming up on the screen for the closed session. I'll just say for the purposes of the streaming, after the closed session, the only thing we'll be doing is coming out and adjourning, and there will be no decisions made. And so we will stop the streaming upon us going into the closed session. With that, I move that the Finance Committee close the meeting to the public to prevent disclosure of advice, proposals, recommendations, analysis, or policy options development by or for the public body, including background factual information and information provided for informational purposes, only in accordance with Section 29, Sub 1A of the Access to Information Act, and information harmful to intergovernmental relations in accordance with Section 26, Sub 1, Sub A and B of the Access to Information Act. With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously.